Jeff Paur, senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. On today's show, I'm going to give you 5 waiver wire ads for Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Hopefully, you had a lot of success in Week 8. Scores weren't too high in Week 8 of the fantasy football season. A lot of players, big-name players, didn't score too well, like Kyler Murray, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, who I'm going to talk about here in a second as well. But a lot of players who were fringe players, some guys who kind of came out of nowhere, did score big, and hopefully you had them in your lineup and were able to win your Week 8 game. Okay, let's talk about Derrick Henry. This news is breaking just now for me. It is that he might be done for the season because of a foot injury. He's getting an MRI. You'll likely know the severity of the injury by the time you're watching this video. But for now, it looks like he's likely done for the season. Again, you should know by the time you're watching this. And that means Jeremy McNichols is likely the next man up for Tennessee. I'm not convinced he's going to be the guy going forward, though. I think they could add somebody either through trade or on the waiver wire, just like you're going to do this week for your fantasy teams. Guys like Marlon Mack, Tevin Coleman, David Johnson, they could be available and they could be additions for the Tennessee Titans. But if they don't make a move, it's Jeremy McNichols, and he's definitely a great pickup for all fantasy teams. I'm not going to mention him in my 5 waiver wire ads for Week 9, though I got 5 different guys to target. But again, if you're a Derrick Henry owner, you're going to want to find somebody to replace him, and he's going to be impossible to replace because he's the best fantasy back in the game right now. But Jeremy McNichols might be the guy right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they made a move. The trade deadline is November 2nd, so that is Tuesday, November 2nd. So there could be some movement on that front at that point. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the player notes and our Twitter feed as well, my Twitter feed too, which is at Jeff Paur, and I will provide any updates as needed. Okay, let's talk about 5 other waiver wire ads for Week 9. My first one is Bears quarterback Justin Fields. I thought he showed his big-time potential last week finally, had his best game as a pro. He had a 100-yard rushing game, also scored 28.1 fantasy points. But for me, the most important thing was he threw the ball better. He made better decisions with the football, got his receivers involved. I still think he could be erratic the rest of the way, but I think this game did prove he has a high fantasy ceiling. So if you're looking for a spot play, I think Fields is worth adding for fantasy teams. My next waiver wire ad is Eagles running back Boston Scott. So it was Boston Scott who was the guy that was the featured back for most of the game over Kenneth Gainwell. I know a lot of people thought Gainwell was going to be the guy, but he played a similar role to what he did do when Miles Sanders was in the lineup, serving more as a third down back, and it was Scott that got the early down work. I know Jordan Howard got some carries as well, but he got most of that work when the Eagles were up big. It was Scott who carried the load much of the game on the ground. He had 12 carries for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he's going to have a big role in this offense as long as Miles Sanders is out. And Scott is still available in 80% of leagues. My next waiver wire ad is Jets receiver Jamison Crowder. Crowder was dropped in a lot of leagues after a couple down weeks, but he got going again this past week in Week 8, caught 8 passes for 84 yards on 9 targets. He got a lot of action with Corey Davis out of the lineup. He was a favorite target of Mike White, who could be the starter for the next several weeks. He has 18 plus fantasy points 2 of his last 4 games as well, Crowder. So he has done it this season, and he did it again last week. I think he can rack up the catches in this offense. And as I mentioned, he was dropped in a lot of leagues. He's out there in a lot of formats. So if you're looking for receiver help, I would consider adding Jamison Crowder. My next waiver wire ad is Saints quarterback Taysom Hill. Jameis Winston, unfortunately, another player that is out for the season with an ACL tear. He is done. Taysom Hill was not active the past couple weeks because of a concussion, but early reports are he should be cleared for the game this week, and that means he'll take over as a starter for the Saints. And we saw what he did last year in a starting role. He really had some big fantasy games, mainly because of his ability to make plays on the ground, and that also helps his weekly floor. He has a pretty high floor because he's going to rush for a lot of yards. I'm not sure he's going to do a whole lot throwing the ball, but his rushing ability really helps his fantasy value. And I think he's going to be a good play the rest of the way. Could be a good low-end number 1 or number 2 fantasy quarterback. My last waiver wire ad is Jaguars receiver Jamaal Agnew. Agnew has really been a surprise. He's emerged as a top target in this offense the last few weeks. He has at least 5 receptions, 3 straight games, scored his first touchdown of the season last week. He's getting regular work in the passing game, and he's scoring consistent points. So I don't think he's a bad pickup for fantasy teams looking for a spark at receiver. I think he's going to get his catches. I wouldn't count on a ton of yards or touchdowns, but I like his reception potential in this offense. Okay, those are my 5 waiver wire ads for week 9 of the fantasy football season. Good luck in navigating that waiver wire in week 9, and good luck in all of your games. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.